All right, we're back. I was saying in my in the previous video, I showed you guys how I built a little chatbot that has memory that allows me to personalize my chatbot by just saying it's a generic chatbot, or saying that it's a pirate, or saying that it is a expert project manager. And these prompts, these system prompts, can kind of change the way it responds to my questions, which might be useful depending on your use case. And now I kind of wanted to talk through how I built this. If I'm honest, once you understand the basics of like how the API works, the rest of it is just up to you and your creativity. So let's start by going through the roots. I built a chat root just like I did for everything in Domo library. So in my chat root, this is sending synchronous requests, so I'm not using async, but that's okay. I'm hitting the Domo.com API text generation API. Because it is behind my Domo instance, I have to either use access token authentication or session token authentication, which I've talked about at length in my tutorials. But the gist of it is I need to generate a properly formatted body. Okay, so what's the properly formatted body? The properly formatted body says, what's the input? So like, what do you want to send to the API? What is the prompt template? And this one, I didn't get a lot of information from John and the engineers I was working for about like what the correct template is. But okay, let's set that aside. I think it's just saying the template is just the input. And I'm low-key wondering if there are other parameters that I could pass, like context, temperature. Like temperature, in case you're not familiar, temperature says how creative is my API, or sorry, how creative is my LLM response? Like, is it good at telling stories and making up things, or is it like it only sticks to the truth? Usually we want things to have a low temperature, low creativity, but if I was using this endpoint to like help me write a story, help me write a book, I might want a higher temperature. So that might be a parameter of the prompt template. I don't know. And what model am I going to use, right? In Domoville, one of the cool things about Domo is that we can use different models. So we can hit Anthropic, GPT Turbo, right? If these are off, if I wanted things to go to OpenAI. For some customers, we have the option of uploading our own custom model. So like if I worked at, I don't know, Harmon's Food, and Harmon's Food had their custom LLM, that might be an option, if that were available to me, so that I can just use stuff that's like my actual company model. We're not here. We're just using Domo's out-of-the-box Anthropic AI. Cool. So that's how I generate the correctly formatted body, and the rest is normal. Just send a post request with the body, with the correct authentication method, and we're off to the races. What I can demonstrate real quick, so here I'm showing in my debug is equal to true, I'm showing what I'm actually sending to the API. I do have a flag return raw, which will just give me the response from the API. So here the response from the API is they include the entire prompt. And then here at the end of the response, they say, this is the model ID that you hit. Is this a customer model, or is this like a Domo model? What was the session ID, the request ID, right? So they do give you a little bit of metadata. And then this is all of the stuff that I included in the prompt. Anyway, so that's back to PY. That's the gist of it, is like you can interact with just a normal API, just like all of the APIs, whether it's the beast mode API, the create a user API, right? We can interact with those the same way. The part that gets interesting is you're like, okay, I have this API response. What tooling am I going to build around it to make it something useful for me? And so that's my model function. Now, this endpoint handler concept, this is actually taken straight from, like, if you go into Domo Jupyter, like out of the box, and you go into Domo Jupyter examples and you look at how do I go about creating a model, they have one for Hugging Face translation. This is what we did, is we opened up the README. Poor Emmy. Emmy was just watching me work, and she's like, Jay, there are instructions. You might consider reading the documentation. And true to, like, male coder, it's like, no, Emmy, we will not be reading the documentation today. We're just going to guess. We're going to guess what we're supposed to be doing. Bless her for being so patient. Hold on. Where did I go? Okay. So this is the boilerplate code, like that Domo gave you for how to do this. And they say, okay, create a class called EndPoint Handler. When it initializes, what is it supposed to do? Now, in the case of this Hugging Face example, they were like, oh, well, we're going to use a Hugging Face model that will translate stuff. Okay. Now, in order to talk to Hugging Face or to use Hugging Face, I have to have a pipeline. Now, pipeline isn't a Domo thing. In this case, pipeline is coming from transformers, which is not Domo, but it's saying, okay, what is the path to the model? And in this example, ultimately the model will get downloaded to your computer as a file called model t file base. It will need a tokenizer, and when you call invoke is the common function that our endpoint needs to have. Invoke, at the end of the day, needs to do something that returns a response from the LLM. Now, because I'm hitting Hugging Face, I'm going to use, again, this pipeline function or class that does something that goes to Hugging Face and basically takes the data that you passed to the pipeline and translates it into German, and then it does a JSON dump string because usually we expect APIs to return JSON. So that's what this this is how their like little not play toy, but how their sample API works. Okay. In my version of this here, again, I built an endpoint handler, but I'm saying, hey, because I'm hitting Domo APIs, I need you to know how to authenticate. And instead of passing session tokens and or access tokens every time, I want to continue using Jay Wilson's Domo library, the auth class, that knows how to authenticate API requests to Domo endpoints. So in my init, I'm saying, hey, in order to initialize endpoint handler, you must have an instance of the auth class, because that's what I'm going to use to authenticate to the chat root. You can see here I'm passing in the auth class, what I call it. So, my version of invoke is arguably not suitable for use outside of Python, not suitable for use outside of J's for J. It's only useful for J because I am not returning JSON. I'm returning a list of messages. So let me do this properly. I'll say invoke. I'm going to do one invoke that says invoke message. Okay. And then I'm going to do another version of invoke returns what you would expect from an API, which is you would expect it to return JSON. So I'm going to say we're just going to return whatever Domo's API gives us. It's a lie because Jay Wilson's classes always return certain kind of class. So I need to return res.response, and then I say JSON dump string. That will be correct. But first I need to import JSON, and we're just going to call this invoke. And instead of returning a list of messages, we're going to return a dictionary. Are we done? Saying make it return JSON. Oh, I need to import JSON. Okay. So now my endpoint should behave like normal Domo. Well, like a normal API endpoint, not a J. Wilson's Python magic. I don't need to. The rest of this will not work. This stuff down here won't work. Okay, so we're validating that I have a good auth object. I am still using messages, this message class, to manage my questions and my context history, blah, blah, blah. Slowly. What's going on? Telling me you're idle. So I still have the messages, and then now I want to invoke my endpoint. Here I can see that I'm hitting the invoke API, which now should just return JSON. So here's the response from the API, just good old-fashioned JSON. So I could say response is equal to this, and then I can say what are we interested in? Missed it. Sorry, hold on. Oh, yeah. Let's say debug API is false. And then I'm going to remove that return raw argument. Okay, so now, do I have a response from the API? So there's my response. If can I say, give me the prompt? JSON.load string. Data. All right, so now it's a dictionary. I can see what was my prompt. That's the prompt, so that's what I passed the API. And it has the key. Why do I have output spelled output? Oh, interesting. Okay, so I have a typo in some of my code somewhere. That's fun. But let's take a look at data. All right, and let's take a look at the first choice. This is what the API actually returns. Right? That's the thing. Okay, and so invoke, where it returns the JSON response, is something that I can now pass into like a JavaScript application if I wanted to, right? But anyway, long story short, this is how we go about getting to the place where we can host an app. Yeah. Anyway, just thought I'd share.